So people don't have choice of like what things they're stained by. And then they come to realize that they are stained and they're filtering the world through their stains. And, I mean, oftentimes we don't realize that we're filtering the world through our stains, like through our traumas or through our memories, whether they're positive or negative. And then you gave the example of like somebody like Mandy and Shattuck who realized that they've been living in a place for 40 years and then, you know, they have certain memories and they're exposed to like different experiences. And then they have like the privilege to actually go to another place. They have like the resources that are necessary to go out and go to a different place and be there, and leave their current situation. And that's like a tangible thing, right? It's like moving from one physical place to another physical place. But the kinds of things that we're talking about, like in the poem that you had said, is these are like emotional and psychological spaces that people, and of course like the physical also, you know, has like emotional and psychological effects that are caused. But how does a person get resources to filter their experiences through something else? You know, like how can someone who has like a trauma past filter their experiences through anything else but that trauma? If they don't have the resources, and if they don't have the capacity to see that that's actually what they're doing.
You know, if you don't have a desire to buy a house, then you're not going to think about resources. The importance of resources come about only when you have a desire to buy a house, because for the first time you realize that, well, you need at least 50,000 down payment. It's only at that point where money becomes of some importance. You know, so someone who doesn't have needs, they have no need for resources. It's only when the need comes about where you say, okay, can I do this? You know, there is this guy, and I think we talked about him just in brief, and I may have translated his poem. You know, his name is Shahriyar. And when you look at the way his face has been sketched or drawn by artists, he looks so angry. You know, it's kind of like the stories you hear about Shams, that he was just rude and crude, he was foul-mouthed. And yet, you know, he has this really, really, really beautiful poems. You know, one of the ones that have recently been floating around, which he wrote, you know, a few years before his passing. زندگانی و زمین زندان ماست، زندگانی درد بی درمان ماست، راندگانیم از بهشت جاودان، زندگی زندان جاویدان ماست. You know, here you have a man, and he is Persian, with the Persian history and culture, which is, you know, has experienced a good amount of trauma and brutality. He has resources in the sense that he speaks Persian really well. He's really educated. He knows Sufism well. He knows Islam well. He knows literature well. And he has this gift of writing poetry. And so, you know, he's also an introvert. He looks at life, and he doesn't see very many happy things about life. Someone who doesn't see happy things about life and doesn't have the gift of creativity is perhaps unreflective, unintelligent, doesn't know literature well, doesn't know the power of words well, doesn't know how to string words together well. Well, all that this person can see and perhaps express is anger towards a life that he or she can't control. Shahri, or like many of us in this room, you're angry, you sit behind the piano and you play music. You wake up and you're sad and you call a friend, and you have the ability to kind of put your emotions in language and talk to your friend for an hour or two. I mean, these are gifts that you have because they rescue you from the pit of loneliness and depression, maybe even suicide to some extent. It's such an amazing thing for someone really like Muhammad, like Buddha, and since we talked about Buddha tonight, to kind of be reflective and be an introvert, to come out and say, life is just bad. And it's not that life is bad, it's the relationship that human beings have with life is bad. And the thing I think that is missing in Buddha's teaching is that biologically we are designed and wired to become attached to people, to love people. You can't easily walk away and just be detached. You can't move into relationships without expectations. These are just ridiculous things to expect from your own organism, And, you can talk these ideas only in terms of ideas. They have no practicality in life, The resources that the Buddha had was that he came, first of all, from a really good family. He was educated. He also had the resource of saying, I don't care for my family, I don't care for my riches, I just want to go into the desert. That's another resource, because not too many people can live with emotional poverty. You have seen your father on a daily basis and all of a sudden you just kind of walk away and you don't feel anything. Not too many people have the resource of going into religion and then having the capacity of looking at religion and saying, this is just rubbish, it's nonsense, I'm going to walk away. And then not too many people have the capacity to kind of walk away from just everything, and saying, it's kind of like the middle path that you talked about. Don't be too much in life, don't be too much in religion, always take the middle path. There is nothing about life that's that interesting, there is nothing about life that's that ugly. And so, he goes around life and his preaching is life is just bad. But he says it in such an interesting, exotic way that attracts a lot of people who just listen to him. I think as long as you have the power to express your discontent, as long as you have the power to express your discontent in a healthy way, in a creative way. I mean, Karl Marx was miserable most of his life, most of his adult life. And yet he took up writing, and he wrote really, really, really well with a great amount of observations. He couldn't get rich. He didn't have money to bury his daughter. He didn't have money to buy a coffin for her. And yet, he was creative enough to think about all of this and write about all of this. And he gifts it to the rest of us. So he takes the misery, the tragedy of the death of his daughter, to whom he was extremely attached, the fact that he couldn't buy a coffin, And he writes about capitalism, he writes about oppression, he writes about, how one class, one group of people exploit other group of people without much care. The rest of us, what can we do? We suffer traumas, and first we don't really understand how this trauma was created. We don't understand the bigger picture behind the trauma. Then even if you don't understand, you have no idea what dealt to do with all the emotions created by this trauma. And even if you did know, you have to be able to kind of put them in some sort of a creative expression. You paint, or you play music, or you bang your head against the wall in a rhythmic way. I don't really know. I think, most of us complain about things because you're not really very talented about many things. You don't have the ability to express. And silence for us about them is not very natural, Being quiet, being silent, at least on the outside, being seemingly at peace and calm, I think for most of us it's just a facade. We don't want to reveal too much, we don't want to expose too much. Because then, it's kind of like when you go before a judge and the attorneys are attacking you, and your lawyers tell you, answer every question with a yes or a no. Don't say things that you haven't been asked. And that's the thing, when you expose yourself, you begin to say things. And then people naturally begin to question you, and then you realize you can't really respond to them appropriately. And then the lack of ability, the absence of ability to express yourself articulately and eloquently, it's like you feel as if the emotions are suffocating you. Because you just don't know what to do with all the things that live inside you. It's a gift for someone like Baba Tahir to be able to observe this about the power of memory, the power of senses, the way we are entangled, the way we are enslaved and imprisoned by them. And in turn, he writes 4 lines, and they are really, really, really magnificent. It's not like he's giving us any remedies. There isn't much you can do with just the way, with the facticity of your life and your organism. You see something, it's beautiful, and you're attracted to it. That's the end of it. He doesn't talk about you pursuing it, but he does say that when you see a Tesla, it just stays with you. And then all of a sudden you look at your car, and you don't like your car that much. You begin to daydream about having a Tesla. He just says this is the way human beings are. And if there was a remedy, its only remedy was to get rid of the senses, which is impossible, I don't really even think that the Buddha had any real remedies about life. They're just not applicable. They really aren't. One of the things, for example, he says is about speech. Speak the right way. Speak the right way to who? In what situations? Sometimes you're around 5-year-olds. What do you talk to them about? Well, you have to come down and be a 5-year-old. It's something like Inayat Khan, the Sufi mystic musician, has in one of his books that when you're with a drunk, act like a drunk. When you're with a prostitute, act like a prostitute. When you're with a Jew, act like a Jew. When you're with a Muslim, act like a Muslim. Who is really that proficient? That your language, you have to custom make it accordingly to your environment. And we have all been around a lot of people to realize that, I just don't want to talk to some people. I don't want to talk to them, period. And even if I do, I wouldn't know what to say to them. And so all of a sudden you realize, well, perhaps when he says proper speech, he's not really saying it to ordinary people. He's talking about specific people. I am not in that specific group of people. So what the hell do I do with the teachings? You know? And so you have 60% of Indians are Buddhists. All of Nepal being Buddhists. And the truth is, you can only be a Buddhist in name. You can't be Buddhist in application because it goes against life. Even when you think about depression or loneliness, or when you go to therapy, initially you don't have the resources when you go to therapy. You pay someone $100 and they ask you questions. What are you doing here? Well, I just met you. You think, what, I'm going to tell you everything? Of course not. I don't trust you like I don't trust anybody in my life. And just because, your name is therapist Joe Schmo and I'm giving you $100, it doesn't mean that I'm going to, give you all of my secrets. So you keep giving them $100. And then slowly you say, okay, maybe I can just say a little bit. And as you become more intimate, your resources increase. And resources in the sense that you begin to trust them more. And when you trust them more, you trust yourself. You feel safe that if I say A, B, C, D to this person, that they're not going to use it against me. They're there to help me. Initially, none of us have resources. And when you don't have resources, you don't have confidence. Your sense of self is quite whimsical. So Cassie painted that frame up there. Sometimes I look at it and say, maybe I can paint something like that. Then I grab a pen and a piece of paper. And I realize I can't even draw a straight line. I just don't have the resources. But it's not a big deal for me. I can go through life without drawing, period. It really depends what it is that lives inside you and what it is that you want to express. The more intense, the more meaningful, the more valuable it is for you. The more resources you think or you feel that you need.